So welcome to the University of Oklahoma. What I want to talk to you today is about sort of how to do Ethics Bowl, the point of doing Ethics Bowl as a sort of competitive activity. So let me just say a little bit about my motivation for getting involved in this stuff. I'm a philosophy professor. I do work in philosophy of social science, including philosophy of economics. But a lot of what I've been doing here in the last few years is about business ethics. So I got involved in Ethics Bowl because I wanted an activity and some training that would help students think about ethical issues. And as you'll see, I sort of have a project about trying to help students be ethically minded. So I'm really in it for the ethics rather than the sort of competitive aspects of it. Although I have to confess, I did competitive speech activities in high school and college, so I'm competitive as well, as Kathy will probably tell you. I can't watch my own Ethics Bowl teams compete. I'm that competitive. They make me nervous. Now I'll introduce you to some of my Ethics Bowl students here in just a few moments. But let me start by just saying a little bit about the ethical project. I find, especially with college freshmen and like this introduction to business ethics class that I teach, that students find ethics to be sort of intrinsically interesting. Ethics involves evaluation, right? Judging, ranking, making rulings, thinking about sort of cases and speaking your mind. And by and large, students are really into that. They like that. If you get, I'm sure this is true for high school students, I see it in college students, but if you say, look, I want you to evaluate the situation, tell me what you think and why you think that way, they're very eager to do that. So there's a lot of intrinsic interest when you want to talk about ethical topics. I see my job as a sort of philosopher and educator to help structure student interest in thinking about ethics without sort of strangling their native interest. So one of the things that you can do when someone finds something interesting is you can sort of plunge them into it in a way that they're like, this actually looks like work. I'm going to back off a little bit from this, right? So, it's like the student who's eager to be on a sports team and then they realize that the practices are hard. They might sort of back away from it in a certain sense. There's also the sense that I think that students have is that they do a pretty good job when they do evaluations. And, from the perspective of a professional philosopher, it turns out that most students come to ethical issues in a very kind of fragmented way. It's not that they're not thinking really relevant things, but their views tend to be in little silos per topic, and they'll think one way about this topic, and the related topic they'll think in a way that's completely inconsistent with it. Or even if it's not inconsistent, they just won't see connections among things. So what I find is that when students, get to the university context, so I'm sure they're like this in high school, they have fragmented and not fully coherent views about ethics. And one of the things that I think ethical education, including Ethics Bowl, really helps students with is this project that I like to call sort of a formation project. Essentially, they're natural-born philosophers in the following sense. They care a lot about these issues, but they're not necessarily very good at thinking about those issues yet. So what we can provide them is some structure to help them out. So that's where I think the value added comes in the educational experience. One of the things that you guys all got is that book by, and I always mispronounce this name because I can't remember, is it Gentili? Yeah, so say Mary Gentili. I thought the E was pronounced. Okay, good. The Mary Gentili book that you guys got today is actually really, really good about thinking about this aspect of the project. Nothing that you do in your classroom is going to cause a giant sea change in people's basic ethical approaches. Not that you shouldn't try and introduce them to things. I mean, there are lots of influences that make someone think about ethics. But, there are a lot of influences on people's lives. So their basic approach is something that you can't change, 1 hour a day 5 days a week for a year. Or worse, a semester, right? I mean, it's just not, you don't have enough influence on them. But what you can do is give them some tools so they can help themselves, and give them some tools so they can articulate their own ethical views better, and give them some tools so they can actually live out their own ethical imperatives better. So that's where I think the value added really comes in. You can help them formulate their views. You can help them see, look, if you think this about that topic, there are some similar issues over here that you're ignoring, so you should really pay attention to that. So if you care about, say, human rights over here, there are human rights issues over here that you should really pay attention to. Or if you think that what really is determinative in this case are consequentialist considerations, you need to take into account the consequentialist considerations over here. So there's a coherence project, and there's a project of helping people to sort of articulate their intuitions about the relative importance of things like consequences and rights and those sorts of situations. So there's a lot of content that you can provide people that will help them. And I borrowed this term sort of shamelessly from sort of a church kind of context. But we talk about formation of people's consciences in various kinds of cases, especially in a church context. I think that's something that you can do in the more secular context of the classroom as well. You can help students see how their own personal judgments fit together and give them ways of articulating their own views, which I think is very helpful. The second thing, and in a way this is what the Gentili book is largely about, it's also something that Bria was talking about this morning, so to sort of reinforce that overlap. This notion of living with integrity, so being a unified person, a whole person, I know Warren talked about that too, right? Is super important because the psychological evidence really suggests that, again, I've seen the numbers a little bit different than Bria did, but she talked about that 20-60-20 phenomenon. It's true that there are some people who will never go against their own moral views. They're just up front and center on their own moral views. There are 20% of the people who arguably don't have moral views, right? I mean, it seems like it anyway. They're very, what's the best way to put this? There's not much that they stand for as a matter of principle. Almost everybody's in the middle, though. And contextual circumstances have a lot to do with whether or not people live up to not even some absolute moral standard, but whether or not they live up to their own moral standards. People can articulate to you what their own principles are, and if you watch them in their behavior, a lot of the time they won't follow them. There's very good evidence that whether or not someone lives up even to their own standards of behavior depends a lot on the circumstances. So one of the things that we can do is to help students be more ethically minded. Help get them out of that sort of middle class of people that sort of go with the flow of the circumstance and nudge them a little bit more towards the thinking about their own values first so they won't violate them. And I think that's important sort of across the curriculum to help people to see when they're likely to be led astray so they can develop strategies that help with that. But Ethics Bowl plays actually kind of an important role in helping people do that because they begin to see all of the different perspectives that people have. They come to invest and own in the perspective that they think is right a lot more because they've thought really hard about it. So again, it sounds like I'm saying what I am saying is that people, you're probably not going to change people's ethical views a whole ton by teaching them ethics, but you're going to make them a lot better at living up to their own ethical views. If they become ethically minded, they'll try to seek out the truth themselves, which I think is a gift that you can give them that's sort of a lifelong gift. It can really, really help them in their behavior. So, being ethically minded, I mean recognizing moral situations when they're in them. You don't have to look very far to find circumstances where things go on and when they become public, everybody is shocked that it has happened. And all the people who are sort of on the inside are like, oh, wait, yeah, you guys are surprised. Maybe there is something funny going on here. So, I mean, the thing that popped into my mind at the thinking about this before today, the last couple of days, was actually the sort of scandal that happened here in the Norman Public Schools with the sort of wrestling team. I won't bother with all the details. I assume that you guys are familiar with the incident. One of the things that everybody finds surprising is that the kids who were involved in this kind of hazing didn't think it was a big deal. Well, when you tell them, think about what you just did. There's a 12-year-old kid on the bus and you chased him down to, you know, do this hazing ritual that's actually pretty nasty. You didn't see that there was something wrong with that? I don't know, just everybody does it, right? People don't see ethical situations for what they are. And thinking hard about ethics helps you to do that. And then secondly, it helps you act in those situations. If you see them, you probably can't resist acting. You need practice in learning how to do it. That's what the Gentili book is about. And that's also partly what Ethics Bowl is about. So that's the sort of foundation for why I think this is an important activity, is it provides at least a certain set of students, and students who will help you will help develop into leaders in this sort of task, become really ethically minded. And even if they've got ethical views that you think are a little bit squirrely or a little bit nuts, which will happen, they're thinking hard about certain kinds of topics, and their thinking hard about it will help them and help you work your way towards better ethical solutions. So getting them interested and getting them thinking hard is really the key to this activity. So I hope you're sold on the activity now, right? That was the goal. So let me say a little bit about Ethics Bowl. I think of this as a kind of intensive ethical training. I realized when I put this on here, I said of future leaders. I don't mean that you go find the leaders and train them. I mean you're creating leaders in the notion of ethical thinking. That's actually what I meant to say. You're equipping a certain group of students to be the students that can be the sort of seed population for people who say things when there's hazing on the wrestling team or similar kinds of situations. I'll make sure I'm not missing something here. The way it works is actually there's sort of two great tastes that taste great together, so to speak, right? I don't know if you guys remember, there used to be that Reese's ad where the guy with the chocolate bar and the guy with the peanut butter run into one another. And what Ethics Bowl does is it combines two really important high school activities, it seems to me. One is just sort of ethical training, but the other is a kind of speech activity. And this is where I'm going to get mildly preachy here. I'm a big fan of speech activities in high school. I think I was a high school and college debater. If you know any high school or college debaters, you know that that's actually kind of a mixed blessing. They tend to be really obnoxious. So am I right? Anybody here know that? There's some of them in the back of the room and they're nodding, so you should know that. It provides you with some really important skills, and Ethics Bowl complements the speech activity really well, and the speech activity complements Ethics Bowl really well. So here's what I mean by that. So in Ethics Bowl, you've got to do a bunch of preparation before you go into a competition. But all that preparation has to be up here. To do Ethics Bowl, you have to be able to go into a room, no notes, purely extemporaneous speaking, and talk cogently for what seems like forever when you first start, like, for 10 minutes, about some ethical issue in an organized way so that you can demonstrate your knowledge to the judges in the back of the room. That is not an easy task, it turns out. It's not easy to think this stuff through. It's not easy to learn how to articulate it. Trying to learn how to memorize it and get it all out in a way that's coherent really makes you learn it. Secondly, in addition to the sort of extemporaneous stuff, the competitive aspect is really sort of virtuous in the sense that it means that you have to think really hard about all the kinds of positions because you have to anticipate what your opponents are going to say. So you know that you've got to be thinking about everything, because if you're not thinking about everything, you're going to get blindsided competitively. So competition helps the ethics part, I think. The ethics part, on the other hand, helps the competition. If you know anything about competitive speech activities in high school, especially the debate-oriented ones, you can run into a problem of sort of sophistry. They quickly become a kind of gamesmanship. Now, there's a sense in which I would want to defend that because the game is sort of worth playing. But in terms of substance, what kids say in high school and college debate rounds is almost all pure BS, right? And they know it, right? I mean, they're not crazy. They know that. But it's all strategic maneuvering. And it turns out having given the time constraints, having a sort of simplistic view about policy in the world is a good way to succeed in the competitive activity. So there's a competitive advantage to being outrageous in some sense. The nice thing about Ethics Bowl is telling, honestly expressing what you think the right thing to do is a really competitively advantageous strategy. So to put this in slightly sort of more gamesmanship terms, you don't have to BS to do well at Ethics Bowl. You can actually say what you think is true and defend what you think the right position is and do well competitively, because the activity awards a kind of breadth. You have to think about lots of different kinds of moral issues. So you can't just poo-poo anything and buzz past it quickly. But it also rewards some depth of analysis, and that the depth of analysis that you know the best is the stuff that you believe. So, say unlike a sort of policy debate, one of the ethics bowlers here at the University of Oklahoma, I have him lean out, and was one of the state policy debate champions in Oklahoma. And what he learned, I'm sure, was that being outrageous was a good way to win. Am I right, Uday? Oh, he's not, maybe he's not back there. Yeah, I want to hear yes. It's a little less true in the sort of Lincoln-Douglas debate, which is the one-on-one thing. And Lawrence Zhao, who's back there, is also a very good debater in that. He won the national debate tournament. So it's, OU creamed all the debaters, it turns out. I'll get to that in a minute. But it's nice to have a situation where speaking your mind, what you actually think is right, can be a sort of competitive advantage. So Ethics Bowl has this best of both worlds. The speech activity enhances the ethical learning because you try really hard, and you've got to get your mind straight in order to just say it well. But it's also the case that the reward structure, by and large, rewards people who are sincere. So that's great. I mean, that makes it a really good activity. So, what I want to do right now is give you a chance to act like you're on an Ethics Bowl team. Rather than tell you a little bit about this stuff, I want to do a little demonstration first. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to hand to you a case that we had to do to get prepared for the Regional Ethics Bowl this year. So if you want to start handing those out. And just sit at your table, and here's what I'm interested in having you guys do. I would like you to read that handout. It's a little long, but you can get through it fairly quickly. It'll take like 10 minutes. Here's what you're supposed to do if you're on an Ethics Bowl team. You're supposed to identify the central ethical dimensions of the case. What are the issues that matter? And then you're supposed to come up with the way that you sort of put the case together. So there are going to be a broad range of things that you're supposed to think about, and then you tell me how you put these sort of things together. And I want you to imagine that your table, you're like an Ethics Bowl team. Ethics Bowl teams run from 2 to 5. I think everybody's at a table of 2 to 5. So you're brainstorming in the way that I have my students brainstorm Ethics Bowl cases. So after you get a chance to look at those sorts of issues, we'll go around the room a little bit and see what everybody has to say about the central ethical dimensions of the case, okay? So I'm going to start the clock now on you guys. I don't know, I'm looking at my, it's 12:32. Let's stop at like 12:42, and I'll go around the room and we'll see what you guys do. Here's what I want to do now. We've had our 10 minutes to talk about this. I hope you noticed 10 minutes is not really enough. What I want you to imagine now is that you're one of the students who was on an ethics bowl team, and instead of getting one of these cases, you're gathered around a table with your fellow competitors, and you were just given 15 of these cases, right? So that was the beginning. Now you got to move on to the next one and the next one and the next one. So there's a lot of work here, right? But here's what I want to do to give you guys the sort of experience of the kind of thing that you have to do this activity. I want to go to each group, and I want to hear. So pick somebody at your table who is willing to be your spokesperson, who's willing to say something about what you take to be the sort of central issues in the case. And then secondly, is willing, if you guys came to one, if there was any sort of one sort of approach or take that you thought was maybe emerging as a consensus, or if there were two, what they were. Because the other thing that an ethics bowl team has to do is come up with a unified front, and you're not always going to agree. So one of the tasks is to sit at the table with people who have different views and try to figure out what you're going to do as a team. So I want you to give me a clue as to where you think it's going along that. So I didn't give you enough time. I know you won't have an ethics bowl case ready to go by the time that we're done. And notice I'm starting here at the back of the classroom because that's just good pedagogy. Make the people who sit in the back start. That's the plan. Now these guys claim that they thought this was the front of the classroom. So I'm going to let them go first for that reason, okay? Yeah. They were actually really eager to do this. So tell me, what do you think? Few central ethical dimensions. What do you think the most important issues in this case are? And where do you think, were you getting to any kind of consensus? And if so, what was it looking like?
Okay. Should I stand?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
And you might even just tell people who you are. That'd be...
Hi, I'm James Corsi. I teach philosophy at Norman North High School. And so when we were looking at this, we quickly kind of came to the consensus that we think vaccines are a good thing. Correct me if I'm...
Yeah, no, definitely correct him, because that's the way Ethics Bowl goes too. Your partners will be tugging on your shirt tail.
I offer the idea that seeing the very successful track records that MMR vaccinations have had in keeping a deadly and debilitating diseases from being a part of Americans' daily lives, that it falls under the responsibility of the government in the social contract to provide that safety for its citizens, and that being a part of a society and understanding the social contracts that kind of underpins the whole relationship between the government and individual citizens in a society, then it's the government's responsibility then to provide that safety. So then that involves individuals giving up some of their rights to the government, because the government is what they have given over their rights to things like vengeance or that sort of thing. That's the nature of the social contract. The individual is handing over to the government power over their rights, to limit their rights, or what they feel are some of their rights, in order to provide for the common good and the common safety. So then it would, under that, fall under the government's authority to impose conditions that would provide for the safety of all of the citizens. And I think then mandating these kind of vaccinations, especially with their very well-documented track record of providing for safety and cutting down on deadly communicable diseases, that the government does have the power to impose that and take away the individual's right to refuse that specific medical treatment. I think the economics of taxations actually complicates this issue. And I think that offering people the opportunity to kind of buy their way out of agreeing with what is clear, sort of the evidence says is a clearly established safety mechanism for the population is not a very ethical idea. That really it creates two classes of people: those who need to abide by the social contract, and then those who can buy their way out of the social contract and their responsibilities to obey the laws of the government. So I really think actually taxing people is not as good an idea. Taxing people for not accepting the vaccine is not as good an idea as simply making the vaccine required for all.
Okay. I'm gonna play coach as we go through here then, but tell me if I'm summarizing this correctly. So we've talked about outcomes. So we've talked about consequences of behavior, and one of, or at least a couple of the sort of very standard theories of morality take consequences and outcomes of behavior as very important. Although it turns out rights considerations can oftentimes run orthogonal to that. So we've appealed to both, and then we've talked about social contract stuff, which I think is really interesting as well. So that's one kind of take. Let's see where everybody else goes, and we'll see if we're coming to any sort of tension points here. So I'm at you guys now. Who wants to be our spokesperson?
I will speak.
Excellent.
My name is Billy Smith again. I'm from Metro Tech. No disrespect. But if we
Oh, see, there we go. We've got the debate going already.
letting the government come in and decide what we parents are going to do with our children is infringing on our religious freedom and just our personal rights. What's it going to be next? They're going to take our soda. They're going to tell us, you know what? We're going to put a tax on you because that has 40 grams of sugar, I just read.
On the can, I assume. Yeah.
So the next thing is going to be, are they going to tax us if we're overweight? Are they going to tax us if we're drinking soda? Are they going to tax us if we're spanking our kids or not spanking our kids? I think we were all in agreement. We were not all in agreement on the vaccination issue. Some of us said we would never vaccinate our kids if we had it to do over. What we were in agreement on is we don't want the government telling us how to parent our children. So the next issue that we all found glaring, the U.S. population right now is 321 million, and we're talking about an outbreak that only affected 100. So we're going to impose a tax on 321 million people because of something that happened to 100. One death, but without knowing more about the child in question, we can't really say, was that death caused by measles, or was he already sick? Was his immune system already compromised when he caught measles? We just don't know enough. So we felt overwhelmingly we cannot deny parents the freedom to choose what they do with their children. Some don't vaccinate for religious reasons, some for medical reasons that affect their child specifically. We just can't do that to people. And I don't know what that says. There's no substantiation. Yeah. She's the attorney. Why am I speaking?
You can talk.
Why am I here?
It doesn't have to be just one person.
Yes, go ahead.
Here, I'm going to stand close to you because I just realized that you guys need to be on the video.
Just one, so beautifully said, but that we cannot make a huge legislative decision based upon potentiality. I mean, all of this is the potential that this might be. It's possible. All of those words that are not substantiated with any real truth, any real facts. It's all pretension.
Okay. Let me play coach here for just a second. So over in this group, we were emphasizing consequences, outcomes. We were talking about the way the world goes. In this group, we're largely stressing notions of rights and who gets to say, right? So what gets said, what gets decided versus who gets to decide is one of those really foundational debates that takes place in ethics. So if I'm coaching let's say 2 teams, what I'm going to say to these guys is, hey, look what you have to address, right? Someone is going to say to you, well, the question is as much who gets to decide as it is what gets decided. And I'll say to you guys, well, look at the way the science works on this, right? It really does look as though vaccinations work, and vaccinations can help lots of people. Is it okay for me to take care of me and my own at the potential risk of harming somebody else? That's one of the things that's in the case. So we've got contrast already, right? And one thing that's actually really important in an ethics bowl situation is you got to look at both those sides. We're going to be coming into conflict here fairly quick. So now we need to start sort of adjudicating those kinds of differences. What are the most important kinds of moral considerations? You got to look at some moral theory to do that. So I would give you guys readings. I'll talk about what that would be here in just a second. So let me come to these guys. I know I'm not going to let Uday talk because he does this. But so you guys want to? I was told to stand right next to the person so you can be on the microphone. So
well, we did have a lot of help. And actually, we broke it down very similar to the way that both of the tables behind us did. We broke it down to, with taxation and the vaccination, and we agreed that the vaccinations were good. Focused with Uday's help on the herd immunization, and for the greater good that it would shield people that had low immunities to things. And so we talked about it needs to be a requirement, but the idea of being coerced into it with a fine or to be able to pay your way out, or people that couldn't afford it so were forced to do it, would not be right. And so instead focusing on trying to do away with some of the misinformation, some of the misunderstandings, spend more time and effort with primary caregivers explaining to people the benefits of it and trying to convince people to do it on their own instead of forcing them to do it.
Okay. So in a way, it's an attempt to handle both of these kinds of issues, right? If you're concerned about the outcomes, you want to make sure that vaccinations happen. But if you're concerned about people having the freedom to make their own decisions, you want to try to do things in as non-coercive a fashion as possible, which is a little bit different from the sort of theory of social contract kind of issue, right? So one of the things that I would say to you guys is, well, what about the social contract? Right? So there's a lot of stuff to be said, it turns out. So I'm going to jump to these guys. I'm not going to let the ethics bowl professors from the Oklahoma or University of Central Oklahoma be their spokesperson. So we're going to let you go.
Okay.
So we're going to get you on video here. So,
okay.
And you have to stand near me so you can hear. They can hear you. See, again.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Yusuf Webster from Mercy School Institute. And so going over this, right, the major issue that came up is pretty much what the other groups said. It's the issue of public safety versus individual rights. So do you coerce people to take these shots through taxation, economic coercion, or do you try to persuade them, or do you try to say, for instance, educate the public and then use give them a little bit of nudge also? Now the shots, as was mentioned in the other groups, they have pretty much generally been effective. Nothing's going to be 100%. That's just not going to happen. I mean, nothing's perfect. But at the same time, where do we draw the line between public safety and individual rights? When you're dealing with, say, for instance, smoking in public areas, you could use an argument similar to that, to where, hey, this individual, has the right to smoke, but not when it's affecting other people. Unimmunized people pose a risk to the general population. So then where does the, like I said, legal system, where does the government step in and execute its rights to protect the public? Now, is there a clear-cut answer to that? No, there's not. There's no clear-cut answer to that. And this is something that could actually keep going round and round and round. I mean, even example, the SV40 virus that was transmitted through polio. Okay, someone could use the argument, I don't want my kids immunized because of that. It is a cancer-causing virus. It wasn't intentional, but it was because the polio vaccination is derived from using what you call it?
Degraded. I forget what. Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Monkeys. It's from monkeys.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any virus the monkey may have may be transmitted. So, but what do? Yeah, I don't have the answer, and I'm gonna say straight up, I don't have the answer. I don't have an answer that would, please everyone in here. But at the same time, it creates a ethical dilemma.
Well, that's good, but what I would say to you as your coach is, look, we gotta have something to say for the competitive purposes, right? What do you think the best balance is? So you're talking about balance, which is good.
Based on the statistical evidence, I would say the vaccination is the best option because public safety supersedes individual rights. Because if an individual wants to kill themselves, okay, well, you're going to let them kill themselves? No, you're going to say, well, guess what? We're going to take your rights from you and stop you.
Okay, good, thank you. So notice because I worked from the back, everybody's feeling like they need to respond to some of the earlier stuff, which is good. That's the way Ethics Bowl works, right? Your thoughts have to take into account a bunch of stuff. What I really liked about what this table is saying now is the way in which there really is a difficult problem, but it's a kind of a balancing problem. Notice, however, that in conceptualizing it like a balancing problem, you're disagreeing with this table about what the status of rights are. I think these guys are arguing, let justice be done though the heavens may fall, as they say, right? So if depending upon your view, notice what we're getting into, your view about rights and where they come from, because you've got to take that into account in order to make the arguments that you're making. Now we're already to the point where we're having to talk about different theories of rights. Are rights contractual? That's a possibility. Are rights sort of like John Stuart Mill said, that they're founded in the greatest good for the greatest number? Or are rights, you might think of them as natural rights in various kinds of ways, or there's a term in philosophy called deontology that says that rights actually are just products of pure reason. And if rights are a product of pure reason, maybe they're harder to balance than you might think. That's sort of a view that these guys might have. So notice we're getting to really deep issues. We're 15 minutes in, right? And this is only one of the 15 cases we have to talk about. So let's come over here. Okay. What do you guys got? I'm going to come stand next to you again. Yeah. So we can.
Well, we decided that the cases against vaccines are not substantial enough to say that somebody should have the right to refuse them. Okay. We also looked at the right to refuse medical treatment. It does exist, but the right to refuse medical treatment is not a 100% absolute right, as has been proven with the Affordable Care Act, which includes a provision requiring someone to buy health insurance and forcing them to pay a fine if they do not. We said because that has been declared constitutional, that there would be nothing unconstitutional about this tax. However, we did think that the reason for the tax would be because the person who does not vaccinate their children is not affecting only the children, they are affecting other people. The right to refuse medical treatment applies only to the individual in the individual's life. It does not apply to other people. So the right to refuse medical treatment does not apply to someone not vaccinating their children. And we also got into, does this extend to things like cigarette taxes, taxes on soda, taxes on any unhealthy food? We decided that things like taxing unhealthy food, taxing soda, taxing cigarettes, those fell under the purview of the government's responsibility to protect public health, and that taxing those things would be permissible. However, where we came to a disagreement was whether this tax was regressive. Would this unfairly hurt lower income families? And we decided that because this tax would hurt lower income families, we did not think that this tax would be a positive policy change. We thought that we would need to, instead of punishing the consumer, we should make this vaccine as low cost as possible, allow everyone the opportunity to have it, and then require it, but not punish people who do not get it.
Okay, well, I thought that was really an interesting take because it added some issues to the mix. I mean, so to try to pull some stuff together, if I'm coaching you guys, I'm going to say, The emphasis on constitutionality I thought was really interesting because it might suggest something about what you think the nature of those rights are. The idea that rights are fungible is one very particular view about rights, as distinguished from others. So it seems like you've got a view about what that is that would be really cool to articulate and argue for. It sounds as though that you're not so different from the first group in terms of outcomes, but maybe a different kind of argument for that view. I think that's neat. That's actually something that's nice about Ethics Bowl. You can end up agreeing about the policy with your opponent and having really interesting disagreements and arguments about how you get there, which is great. The second thing that I wanted to say, and this did come up a little bit before, but since I'm coaching you guys separately, you've got a really interesting view about the appropriateness of taxation. So you're thinking a little bit about sort of policy implementation, right? Whatever view that you have about who has what rights, what role consequences should play in this, there's just sort of a policy implementation question about whether or not taxation is the way to make this work. So actually that was one of the things I know our guys did when they prepared for this view, is to think about taxation as a policy tool, not merely as it's a tax for the right thing, so it must be a good idea. And I think you guys hit upon that really nicely. So that was good. This is all working out. This exercise is working better than I thought. So good. Yeah. Yes, pedagogy. All right, you guys are up next. Okay, I'm going to come stand by you though, so they can hear. I got my instructions.
Okay. So everybody's brought up two big issues that we saw. We also mentioned another issue that it sort of slid in when it said the worrisomely close relationship between the FDA and the companies that make the vaccines and this existence of the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. And one of the things that we said with that one was that if there is potential danger of these vaccines, it needs to definitely be addressed, and the government shouldn't be protecting the company producing the vaccine from incurring any issues or incurring any expenses that may befall them as a result of their shoddy workmanship / cutting corners, possibly. I think that was always said on that one.
Government tax on behalf of a corporate institution.
So what you're saying is that one of the things that might be kind of illegitimate is the government is essentially subsidizing these firms,
right,
because they're for profit.
The form, since the companies are for profit, the government would essentially be helping the company itself.
Right. So you've got the sort of, in a way, sort of direct subsidy. Even if everything's above board, there's a subsidy for the firm.
Right.
But worse, it might be not all above board. That was sort of the, okay.
But we did also say that part of the thing with the vaccine and the precedent with the cigarette tax is that the cigarette tax, the money for that is also goes towards educating people of the dangers of smoking. And if the taxation on the vaccine, on those who do not receive the vaccine, also went towards educating in general people of the protections of vaccines and the help that they give our society, that could be useful. But we said that tax couldn't be applied. You had mentioned some people choose not to receive vaccines due to religious reasons. If they're exercising their religious freedom in order to not get vaccines, you can't tax them for their religious beliefs. However, if it's someone who's just trying to cite this research that has been retracted, then that's not, they're uneducated on it, and it's the government's duty to educate them on the real research.
Okay, good. So it sounds as though, I mean, I know you guys talked about some of the other kinds of issues too, and you just went to you went to the new ones, but the new issues that got raised I think are really interesting because they're implementation worries largely, but now we're not talking about the general issue of taxation, although that arises. We're talking about sort of government relation to business and whether or not it's too comfortable, too cozy, whether or not it's okay for a government to, essentially prop up one firm and not other firms that might be working. This is a huge issue in business ethics, obviously, so I think about that a lot. But to be honest, that wasn't an aspect of the case that I had ever thought about very much. And it goes along very nicely with the questions about sort of taxation as a policy tool. Because, I mean, like I was suggesting, when our team sort of put together some research on this. We were talking about the effectiveness of taxation as a policy tool rather than the sort of legitimacy of taxation as a policy tool. And it seems like you guys have come up with sort of an argument that's about legitimacy that doesn't require that you take one position or the other about the legitimacy of just imposing vaccines. So it's at least possible that you guys could say, yeah, it's okay to make people get vaccines, but it's not okay to tax them in this kind of way. Well, I hadn't thought of that view, actually, so good job. Stump the coach, right? That's all right, so we're working our way forward. Everybody's getting more complicated. You guys ready to go?
No. Okay. So our discussion has focused largely on the concern for parents to be making a responsible decision and a well-informed decision, but also desiring for the parents to be making that decision in a free way. And so it seems like a goal of a free society, of a liberal government, is to promote responsible citizenship, including responsible parenting. This is why we have public schools. This is why we have public service announcements where we just give information and we let people act on that information. We would like for there to be a way to do this in a non-coercive way, maybe in a way that works through learning and understanding. I liked what the last group had to say about trying to increase the transparency in this relationship between a government agency and private corporations. I'm not sure that we want to go suing people that make our vaccines too often, or they may just quit. But at the end of the day, we would like to see, as far as the government question, the political question, we'd like to see people see the government work through maybe raising awareness, the way that we've done with environmental concerns and through smoking. Somebody brought that up earlier. Maybe denying certain public services, like public education, would be an option before taxation, as the first group pointed out, which creates this sort of discrepancy in those that have and those that have not. I'd wondered whether something could be done with regard to the insurance companies, where the insurance companies could ask, please do this in order to qualify for your health insurance. Something similar is done with smoking. But the thing that we want to do is promote responsible parenting, and I think what we're trying to do is recognize obligations of parents. And so at this point, it does become an ethics of parenting question rather than simply a political question. The parents have two obligations, it seems to me. One is that they need to do what's best for their children with the best information that they can get. It's my sincere belief that if we were to promote not only doing the best for your children, but getting the best information to work with, that we probably would get more people immunizing. The other thing, and this seems like a fundamental tenet of modern moral theories, is that you don't get to make an exception for you or your family. You don't get to depend on what other people doing the right thing so that you can cheat.
Right, right.
And I'm not sure that we need. I'm not sure that a tax is the best way to promote people doing the right thing with regard to all of these things. That might be better than just saying, mandating everybody's got to have a shot and the FBI is going to come to your house and get the shots or something. But at the end of the day, that seems like the goal, and that seems like what we want from the parents. Don't think it involves giving up rights. I'm not sure that those are the kinds of things that you can give up. I'm not even sure that we can look at previous legal precedent to find out what the right answer is to this question. I think what we want to look at is the basics of what we want for the parents and then the best way for government to promote responsible parenting.
Okay, good. So I'm going to coach you here in a second, but I want to make sure everybody behind sort of heard what the view was. What I think is really interesting about what you guys have done is you've made the sort of like political philosophy, in a certain sense, personal morality philosophy distinction, which I think has kind of been floating around in the room a little bit, but you've made that very clear. And what seemed to be interesting about that is at the political level, you seem to agree with sort of table 2, right? There are some rights that we're not going to give up.
I don't want to say rights.
rights.
Well, okay, wait, or duties maybe might be better, right? So, but yeah, no, I don't mean it in, I mean, so it's definitely a sort of deontological conception of rights. So they're inalienable in a certain sense. I think you even mentioned something along those lines, which is good. Combined with some of the consequentialist considerations that we heard with Table 1 and floating around, but that's at the sort of parental responsibility level. So you're suggesting a sort of two-tiered moral analysis, which I think is really interesting and which has been, I mean, I think if you guys were all a team, I was trying to get going on that, I'd say, hey, look, you guys should think about those two tiers and see how that helps you think through your stuff. Or at a minimum, you've got to be able to say something about that two-tiered kind of view. So I think that's actually really, there's a lot of value added in that. So good job, table second to last. I haven't, you know, yeah, it was great, right? I mean, it was fantastic. All right, you guys are next.
Well, I think most of it's already been said.
Well, that's probably true.
But, you know, I think the way we kind of come across was that there's actually two issues here, taxation and the right of parenting.
Sure.
And as far as taxation goes, if I remember right, back in the 1700s, there was this problem with a T on tax, a tax on T, that caused a problem. And I'm afraid that's what would happen with taxes this way also. You can't force a tax. You force a tax, that is unethical, that's immoral, it's not going to be done. You're going to have rebellion. Whereas education, like I think one of the tables mentioned a while ago about trying, if there were a taxation put on it, using it towards educating, but even before we do that, there needs to be more education about it. There needs to be studies done into the FDA and the government and to see what's going on there. If there's some collusion going on there, it needs to be stopped and taken care of. Good luck. That's part of the political process. But as far as taxing goes, no, that's not the way to do it. There's other ways to be looked at, and it needs to be studied a lot more. As far as taking the right away from parents, no, you can't do that either. Because parents, that's the problem we have in society today, is parents are not parenting. They're letting other people raise their kids. They're letting the government take over. They're not letting schools help out. They're not letting other people help out. They're just letting them go on their own. And that's where we're in different type of problems. But I think we kind of decided that the taxation is not the good way to do it. But there needs to be, as to quote from Star Trek, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Okay.
And there still needs to be some more things done this way. How you're going to get it, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
well,
it's going to be something we'll have to work on.
So yeah, and I know and if it were an ethics bowl case, I'd make you say, well, that's what you got to figure out next, right? But let me do my little coaching bit, and then I want to pull some stuff together. One of the things I think is really interesting about the sort of take that you guys have is when we first started, we were talking about the vaccinations and what it was appropriate to do with the vaccination. So like table 2 was like, look, you've got to let the parents decide about vaccination. There's a sort of rights or obligation-oriented reason there. And I think you're the first table that's ever gotten to that kind of, it's called deontological reasoning, that kind of deontological reasoning about the tax stuff, right? So we've heard some stuff about when taxes are appropriate and when it can be a mistake and when there might be collusion. And I think your table was the first one that said, look, the issue with taxes actually isn't all that different from the issue with parenting. There are things you just shouldn't be able to do. You can't tell the parents what to do, and no taxation without representation, roughly, right? So we've got to talk about how those sorts of things get implemented. And here's what I would suggest to you. Thinking about, what, is a majority enough to get a tax? Suppose 50% plus 1 say, yeah, let's tax it. But they do it based on the reasons from group number 1. Is that likely to satisfy the worries that you have about taxation? I mean, 50% plus 1 doesn't satisfy table 2's worries about vaccination, so it probably won't satisfy your worries about taxation as well. So that was fantastic. That was good. So we were getting value added the whole way down the group. That was fantastic. So let me give you a little bit of sort of summary just to say something about how this exercise goes. When I have the Ethics Bowl team together, we'll look over the cases and we'll spitball them roughly like this. We'll try to pull out all of these various kinds of dimensions, and I haven't been doing a great job of sort of counting yet, but notice how many different takes. Now, some of them were close to one another, and some of them were almost had this kind of fractal quality, right? So we talked about rights and consequences when it came to vaccines, and then we got to sort of the same kind of rights and consequences when we were talking about taxation in order to get to vaccines, right? So there's some issues that come up over and over again in various kinds of contexts that you have to pay attention to. There are issues about political legitimacy that almost always happen. So we're doing a sort of contractarian notion of political legitimacy. We've got a sort of rights-oriented notion of political legitimacy. We've got a consequentialist notion of political legitimacy. That can get you off into sort of, like ancient Greek philosophy. You can read Aristotle's Politics, has a bunch to say about what the role of a government is in helping citizens become better people. So we've got all of these things all over the map. Now that we've got a bunch of those central ethical dimensions together, we've got to think about which considerations involve some tensions with one another. So one of the things you would have trouble doing is saying, well, when we think about vaccines, that's just totally consequences. Rights, who cares? Just consequences. But when you get to taxation, you think, oh no, it's all rights. You're in trouble. You've got to actually at least have some way of putting together a coherent story. So if you're going to have a real rights orientation towards one, you've either got to have a rights orientation toward the other or a story why you don't have to. So I'm going to be, I'm pushing my team to think about consistency across all those kinds of views. And then finally at the bottom, there are these tensions between, let's suppose the facts turn out to be the case, that vaccines really would save lives. How strong do rights considerations matter then? That's the hard tension. And if you're going to argue one view or the other, you've got to do something to sort of defang the intuition behind the other view. And there are philosophical arguments about that I would try to push you toward to think about. Now, are they decisive? I mean, there's some worry before. Could we go on doing this forever? Well, I mean, there's a sense in which we can certainly go on doing it for longer than anybody has a taste for doing it. In that sense, I think that's right. But really, as we keep going, we're going to get sharper and sharper focus, so we'll see right where the tension really lies. That's what I think is super important about just brainstorming these kinds of cases. So you've seen sort of how the brainstorming begins. You've seen that it's not always easy. There wasn't a single table that probably thought of every one of these kinds of issues. I mean, many of you thought about many of them, but even getting them all out on the table is a non-trivial task. And you guys are by and large, educated adults. If you get college sophomores or, well, college sophomores tend to be pretty good. If you get, high school freshmen, it's going to take them a little longer to do this, but you can see the value in them doing it. And that's before we've gotten to the second case, and that's before we've gotten to the sort of skills orientation of the ethics bowl stuff, right? You've learned a lot of philosophy today, if you're paying attention, and getting good enough to give speeches about that, really good educational experience. Okay, now that we've had some idea sort of about how the activity works and the preparation that goes into it, I want to give you a few of my tips on sort of forming a team. The first thing that you need to think about is just sort of identifying the kind of talent that you need for an ethics bowl team. And what you're really looking for is students that have certain kinds of skill sets, and they'll overlap in different ways for different students, but it's important that you get some of these people because it really helps jumpstart the sort of team formation process. So what do you need? What does Ethics Bowl talent really look like? Well, the first thing that I would say is you need to find someone who's a pretty good speaker. So go talk to the debate team, go talk to the speech teacher, go talk to people like that. People who are sort of at least willing to stand up and speak in front of other people and are able to sort of provide an extemporaneous speech are actually really important to the activity, because it requires that everyone who actually speaks in the round have that skill. Now, not everybody has to have that skill going in, but it's really difficult to train 4 or 5 speakers to prepare for an Ethics Bowl event. So if you have at least one person who has that native skill, everybody feels a lot more comfortable. They can always kick it to that person, and you don't get anybody freezing or anything like that. So that's sort of talent number one. You want to be able to find somebody who's willing to sort of do the public speaking aspect of it. And then once you get that person on the team, they'll help other people get it. The second thing that you need to be able to get is someone who knows something about ethics. Now, at the university level, it's actually easier to find people like that, because you can go, troll the political science and the philosophy departments, and you'll find someone who has that skill. It might be a little bit harder at high school, but what you're looking for is someone who either knows something already, or who's just really deeply interested in that, who you can motivate to do some reading in order to learn some stuff about ethical theory, so they can help guide their fellow students. Once again, everybody's going to have to learn how to do that, but having somebody who has that skill, who's sort of the go-to guy, somebody who they can ask questions to, will really help get the team together. So that's the second thing that you need, is somebody who knows something about ethics. The third person, however, is you need the enthusiastic person. You need the person who's at the back of the classroom going, ooh, ooh, pick me, pick me. The reason why you need that person is because they're really essential for getting everybody motivated to doing all that stuff. I mean, it's really nice if they're also one of the people who has either the sort of organizational skills or the skills in ethics or the speaking skills, but you need the person who has the enthusiasm to sort of ride herd on everybody else, to say, hey, let's get together, let's talk about this kind of issue. They'll do some of the planning for you. They'll help be the person who's the driver or motivator behind your team. So you need to identify some of the talent. It's going to be all over school. You're going to need some smart kids, so look in the honors groups, so the honors classes. You're going to need some really motivated kids, so you're going to want some of the popular kids, or some of the kids who can get other people really interested in things. You're going to need some of the scholarly kids. The important thing ultimately is that you get some kind of division of labor. It's actually a problem if all the skills are just in one person, because they'll want to do it all themselves. You're really trying to form a team, and you need different kinds of people for the team. So that's sort of the talent identification part. The recruitment, I have to admit, I've been really lucky here at the University of Oklahoma, because I was able to recruit some people for the very first Ethics Bowl team, and they liked it a lot, and they were in these tight-knit groups through the Honors College, so they just continued to recruit for themselves. I could keep, basically hands off. What you'd like to be the case, though, is once you've sort of beaten the bushes on the debate team, beaten the bushes in the speech classes, beaten the bushes in the advanced English classes, for example, maybe for somebody who knows something about ethics, tried to find some of those enthusiastic students from a variety of places. Honors classes will do, but get the cheerleader, get the high school quarterback or something, a natural leader, and try to get them all assembled together. And when the team clicks, it tends to be self-perpetuating. They'll get people sort of pull each other in. But use your other teacher resources. You're probably not going to know everyone who will be on your team yourself. Get them to think about their friends and the skills that their friends have, and try to make it a fairly diverse group, because there are lots of different kinds of needs, and you want lots of different kinds of skills so they can transfer across to one another. Make sure I have all my stuff here. Yeah, so the trick is really sort of to get them to recruit their friends. So you need enthusiastic people, and you need people who are well connected, who know each other really well. So honors students actually tend to work pretty well like that. What about training your team? Well, I mean, to be honest, your main job as the Ethics Bowl coach is to get them on a schedule and get them near one another and present them with issues. They're going to have to figure out a bunch of this stuff themselves because you can't be there to help them sort of during the round. You can watch. I'm sort of famous, as Kathy knows, that I don't watch my teams compete. And it's partly because when I see them competing, I'm like, oh, they could have done this better, they could have done that better, right? I don't want to be the guy who has sort of these weird facial expressions in the back. So what you sort of have to get them trained up and send them off on your own. And to get them started on that, you set a time for them to be there, like to do it weekly, and get them in the room, and then they've got to work with each other. So you're there to sort of nudge and prod, and I guess nudge is nudging and prodding, make them work together in important kinds of ways. So I think of myself as a facilitator. I mean, this is the way I teach seminar classes in the graduate program. You get a bunch of smart people together, you've got a common topic, you start them off, you ask probing questions, and you make them answer them. So that includes things like brainstorming. So the little exercise that we did in here before is very much what I do with Ethics Bowl teams, although I was a little nicer to you guys than I am to them. Sometimes I'll say, well, wait, you can't say that and that at the same time, because those come from two different sort of ethical approaches. How are you going to paper over that difference? You're going to have to choose some there, right? So playing the critic, letting them put the positions out there, and you try to sort of push back a little bit so they'll think in new directions and think harder about various kinds of things. So brainstorming is really crucial. It's also crucial that you be a resource for them, right? So if you think, well, there are some philosophical views that start in that position, but they end up over here. Maybe you should think about that. Or, oh, the people who think about that also tend to think about this kind of thing that you've mentioned over here. Those two things are connected. You should think about how those connections work. So I give them assignments, I prod them, poke them, but I let them choose their positions because they're the ones who have to ultimately articulate them. So brainstorming is important, and then practice. And I have to admit, we could be better about this, but the only way to get better at any kind of a speech event is to have practice speeches, essentially. So we rarely do sort of complete Ethics Bowl rounds of the sort that you're about to see. Ethics Bowl involves a team giving an initial presentation, a team giving a response, the other team giving a response presentation, and then the initial team sort of following up to reply to the responses. And practicing all of those kinds of speeches turns out to be important. And oftentimes we'll do them just as sort of speeches rather than doing them as a sort of full Ethics Bowl event, so you can focus on those particular kinds of skills of the various speeches. Once you've got them sort of going in practice, they pretty much handle themselves. I mean, it's really one of the easier things that you can do if you're the organizer, making sure that they're there on time, they've got a place to be, that they're thinking about the right things, they don't sort of wander off into the weeds, and giving them an opportunity to practice is the sort of primary thing that you can do as their sort of coach in order to make things work. So speech, ethics, you got to be able to do that. I'm going quickly now. Where do you find these people? Find those enthusiastic kids in your class. If you find honors students who are interested in this and they think it's valuable, that's enough of a sort of a clique almost that becomes a tradition. So we had some, you'll have to tell your recruitment stories later, but for a long time for the OU Ethics Bowl team, we had some very enthusiastic, sort of high-achieving economics majors for some reason. I don't know why it was economics majors, but it happened to be economics majors. And they did all the recruiting for me. I didn't have to go find anybody. It was fantastic, right? Because they were just like, oh, this is a cool activity. You learn how to do all these really important skills. Come join us. It's fun. Your mileage may vary. It's been easy for me because I've had really good students. Finally, sort of training. You got to give them a schedule. Students are busy. If you can't make them meet at least once a week, it's going to be trouble. This is one area that I think we need a little help on. But secondly is, it's like a seminar. They like to think about these sorts of issues if they're there. I'm there to facilitate. So, I mean, I run a notoriously like lax meeting in a certain sense. It's like, all right, what are we going to say about this? Tell me. You tell me. I'm not telling you. You tell me. Oh, wait, well, what about that? Oh, you like that position? I think I can give you some sites to help you figure out how this will work. But I basically just make them do all the darn work, really. And I just try to coordinate and handle and say, that point goes with this point. So think about those two things at the same time. So what I did today during class, I do in a more, I'm nice to you guys, I'm not so nice to them. I'm like, no, 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 you can't say that. You have to, that's going to contradict what you just said, right? So, but I mean, I feel like I am there to facilitate. Brainstorming is really important, but you also need practice. And again, that's another thing that I was more of a slacker about than I should have been. If you want to practice, I'm always available. I need to force people to practice more. But it really is a skill, so you've got to give people time to like give the speeches, make sure they can get them in on time, make sure they're long enough, make sure they're saying really coherent things. I hope you'll see that my people are really good at it, and it's mostly because they're good. You know, I'm the laziest coach in the world. Kathy does a better job, I'm sure. But you know, I think recruiting good people, it's almost like sports, right? You know, who wins ethics bowl competitions? The people who have smart students and let them be smart. Okay, so that is all I've got. What we need to do is get my students up here right now. Let's set them at this table. So let me introduce to you the participants in today's discussion. If I have this correctly, the team that will be addressing the case first, so they get a long speech, and we're going to give you guys 8 minutes, okay? We're going to go 8-4-4, I think, because for time purposes. On team number 1, on our left, their right, Carly D'Alessandro, who is a GIS sophomore, right? Geographic Information Systems sophomore? Yes. Yes. And then Uday Kohli, you're what kind of engineer? Not an engineer, damn it. Biology, damn it. I should know this stuff, right? I'm embarrassed to say. In a way, we have a special guest here. Cheryl Frazier is a former Barry University in Miami Ethics Bowl competitor, but she's now a PhD student in the philosophy department, and she helped me coach this year. And actually made it much easier for me to even be lazier than I was before, which is a beautiful thing. So Cheryl is involved in the debate, and then Lawrence Zhao on the end. And what are you doing? You're sophomore and you're MIS. So there we go. So here's the way an ethics bowl competition works. These guys would actually introduce themselves in that case, but since I threw them in a weird situation, I figure I would introduce them to you. We would open a packet. They would have no notes in front of them, and I would say, okay, case number 1 is the Indian Child Welfare Act. And then they would be asked a question they don't know what it is yet. And the question in this case would be, I'm making one off the top of my head. Normally they don't do that, although that's the way we do it in practice. Is it more important to take into account economic circumstances or cultural values in determining what happens to Native American children when they go up for adoption? So if you look at the case, you'll see it's about the Indian Child Welfare Act. Those are among the considerations that are raised. So then team number 1 would get, the times change a little bit depending upon where you're at. I'm going to give you guys a minute to get ready, okay? Okay, so you're ready to go the way it is? Okay, the minute's done. Okay, minute. Okay, you can have your minute. Okay, so let's give you a minute. I don't actually have a minute. Okay, good. So each round between 2 teams, 2 different schools, has 2 halves. 1 half of a round covers a single case. The team that has the case, the first team for that half of a round, gives a long speech. In college, it's 10 minutes. I think high school, it's shorter. I think it's 8. You have 8 minutes to talk. There's a 1 minute break while the other team can get prepared, and then they give a response that's half as long as the original speech. In college, it's 5. I'm buzzing, sorry kids. It's 4 minutes in high school. And then the original team gets 4 minutes to reply back, and then the judges ask question for as long as the long speech. So long speech, short speech by second team, short speech by first team, judge questions. Then you take all the paper up, throw it away, because it's all extemporaneous, and you get another case, and then the team switch sides. But let's see an example here. So you guys about ready? I think you've had more than your minute. Yeah, okay.
We definitely called the minute.
Okay, good.
All right, ready to start? I'll keep time on my own. 8 minutes?
Yeah, 8. There's normally a timekeeper in the round, but...
First, I would like to thank everyone for being here. I am honored to engage in this ethical discussion about the Indian Child Welfare Act and whether economics or cultural issues should take a priority in determining adoption for children on reservations. I would first like to start by almost like flipping the frame that surrounds this question in a majority of these discussions. Instead of making it economics versus cultural, we should recognize that these are not always mutually exclusive concepts, and we can benefit a culture and benefit children culturally and economically at the same time, and that should definitely be our priority when determining these adoption cases. Second, I would also like to emphasize the importance of culture in ways that I believe not too many people give much consideration, especially drawing from my own personal experiences. Growing up in an Indian household and living in America, a very multicultural country. So first, let me start with the importance of culture. And I believe that culture plays a very, very key role in determining one's identity. And I know this because of many hours I've spent on introspection about ideas of belonging and family history, and all those really deep questions about my personal identity. And I found that having Indian parents and growing up in America puts me in a very unique situation where I almost traverse different cultural zones almost constantly. And for this reason, I place a very, very large importance on culture in terms of how I view the world around me and how I view my interactions with people, my family and my friends. And because of that, I believe that using a cultural frame to address this question of adoption is incredibly important. Because a lot of the economic aspects of where children should go when they're up for adoption focus on putting children in good homes and making sure that they're in stable family situations. And these ideas of good homes are definitely culturally informed. Obviously in America, while multicultural society, it's the prevailing ideas are definitely that a good home has like middle class, a mom, a father, a couple children, and access to plenty of benefits, healthcare, education, and these are all values that we as Americans hold. However, these values can change based on which cultural situation you're in. The families in America are incredibly nuclear, focused around a small group of close-knit people. But in other cultures, whenever I visit my family in India or for Native American reservations or many other cultures around the world, they're much larger families, and you have close-knit ties with your aunts, uncles, your cousins. You all live together, you all grow up together, you all share the same experiences to an incredibly strong extent. And for that reason, the definition of what a good home to grow up in is definitely informed by culture. And for that reason, we believe that it's important to emphasize culture when determining where these children go when they're up for adoption, because it helps them define an identity, and it helps them retain all of these ties that are to a very close-knit group of people.
So to continue, when we're looking at the specific Native relations in the United States, we have to kind of look back at the history, specifically starting with the idea of the Native American Child Welfare Act. Lyndon B. Johnson talked during his presidency about how, culture is incredibly important for these natives, and however, during this time, there was this stigma that the Native American was broken. They were a drunk, they were just essentially this person that didn't necessarily culturally or socially matter because they didn't have money. They were going to neglect and abuse their families. The fathers would leave. And that simply isn't true. Whether the US government intended to or not, they unintentionally, or they promoted these ideas of the broken Indian, which incentivized white Americans to adopt these Native children. Now, since the 1960s, when Lyndon B. Johnson started talking about these issues, many tribes have dropped in cultural terms. So, like, in order to be a recognized nation, you have to have certain things like songs, a spoken or written language, a certain amount of population that exists. So, for example, the Chippewa tribe, they had a very hard time getting federal recognition throughout the 50s and 60s. They're currently a tribe with about 100,000 people. However, only 12 people in that nation currently speak the native language of the Chippewa people. This is also known as the Ojibwe people or the Anishinaabe people, depending on who you're talking to or what region in North America you're in. So in order to continue culture for these Native American people, in order to retain their languages, retain their songs, their cultural practices, taking the children away from the natives isn't necessarily a good idea. We do have to keep the child in mind and the the well-being of the child in mind, but it's not about, well, this white family has the ability to take care of them better. There isn't necessarily a better once you reach a certain point, and I think my colleague here would agree with that. Being able to continue culture while still looking at economics is about maintaining this idea that you don't have to be rich to take care of a child. You don't have to have a husband to take care of a child. And it's actually proven now, there was a journal that recently published an article involving this idea of the drunk Native American and how actually Native Americans consume alcohol less than the average white person in America. And that goes against everything that propaganda-wise has been told to people of America. They've been told that Native Americans are genetically predisposed to have alcoholism, whereas it's been proven that that's not true. There's nothing in a native's genes that makes them more susceptible to being addicted to alcohol. There's nothing in their genes that makes them more susceptible to being neglectful parents. The reason these images were created was because we took over their culture. We got rid of it. And if we want to continue those images, that's just simply not an option. It's cruel, it's rude, it's simply not an option. I mean, the Native American children should be kept within their cultures because they're not going to be raised to be bad people. They're not going to be raised to be alcoholics. They're not going to be raised being neglected. And that's pretty much how I feel about it. Do you have a couple of seconds here to wrap up?
Yeah, so again, making the economic situation better is a desirable goal, but it needs to be focused on making the situation better for all Native Americans. And by taking children out of these communities only makes the situation worse.
Okay, so give yourselves a minute.
We'd also like to thank everyone for being here today to discuss the important issue of the Indian Child Welfare Act, as well as to the presenting team for offering some very important, relevant information about the Indian Child Welfare Act. The ultimate question that we think is posed here is, should natives automatically get priority for adopting native children? And we believe that in the context of the question of economics versus cultural consideration, the answer should be no. While we agree that in general, natives should get priority for the adoption of native children as a way to preserve cultural heritage, there are circumstances where the child's interests should outweigh tribal and cultural interests, and so natives should not automatically get the priority for adoption of native children. Take, for example, the story of a 1/16th Native American child who was adopted in Los Angeles by two loving non-native parents. But at the age of 4, after never knowing their biological parents or having any connection whatsoever to any tribes, were claimed by tribes in Kansas, claiming the Indian Child Welfare Act gave them automatic precedent to adopt these children who had lived with loving non-native families for over 2 years. These children had no idea about culture. They had no idea about the fact that they were native. They were 1/16th. They did not know. And they only began just calling their parents, their non-native adopted parents, by mom and dad, instead of referring to them by their first names in sort of a distant way. The Indian Child Welfare Act would automatically take these children away from loving, stable families who have very vested interest in maintaining the growth of their children without taking into account consideration for how adopted parents might actually be good for non-native children. They say that culture is good for identity, but sometimes there is just absolutely no connection to their tribes. In most instances there are, but sometimes it is not the right answer to automatically give these children to tribes. And they say that these things about economics and of what a good home is culturally informed, but we shouldn't be asking the question of economics versus culture. We should be asking what is better for the child, and in some circumstances, leaving them with non-native parents who are in better fiscal situations than native tribes might be what is best for the child overall. It is obviously better for the child to be culturally connected if possible, but there are some circumstances where we believe that is not always the case. And finally, they say that parents don't need to be rich, and we absolutely agree. You do not need to be a rich native person to adopt another native child and raise them in a very good way. But sometimes we do need to realize that there are circumstances where children should not be taken away from parents merely because they are native children. To further elaborate on this, I'd like to throw it over to my teammate.
Thank you. So in addition to these problems with the application of the Indian Child Welfare Act, we would like to argue that the Indian Child Welfare Act is not sufficient in promoting the culture of Indian people in the United States. It seems as though there's an inconsistency in promoting this Indian culture among the government of the United States. And they want to say that, yes, the Indian culture is important, which we wholeheartedly agree with, as does the presenting team. However, it seems as though in other situations, the government does not go far enough to promote the culture of Indians. For example, I come from Southern Maryland, and in this area, in the Chesapeake region of Southern Maryland, there's a tribe called the Piscataway tribe. This tribe of Indian people has a museum in the community which promotes the Indian culture and their specific tribal traditions and helps carry on their language, their songs, their dance, all of the important things that Carly pointed out are what is necessary to have the tribe be recognized. However, they did not get the funding that they need from the federal government to continue this museum, and so a large part of their culture is now going to be erased. It seems as though if we want to say that we really care about the culture of these Native American people, that we need to do more than just acts like the Indian Child Welfare Act. We need to take extra measures in instances such as the museums to really promote their culture and help the culture and the tribe as a whole thrive, beyond just keeping Indian children in. And then in situations such as Lawrence suggested, where the Indian child is not able to continue being a member of the tribe and to live with the parents in the tribe, then it would not be as devastating because the culture is preserved through other measures.
So 1 minute, and then we'll have a reply. And then we're going to let you guys be some of the judges. So you'll get to ask questions that you think are relevant, okay?
It's 4 minutes?
Yeah, 4.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good. Okay. So thank you guys for making your points. You just want to address a few of them. The first one being that this idea of the child that was taken from Kansas through the means of the ICWA, which is the Indian Child Welfare Act. The idea behind this is actually very similar to what happened throughout the 40s and 50s with Native children. Children were being kidnapped, actually kidnapped without permission from their parents, taken from their homes and put into schools that were whiteification schools. It was the idea to look past culture and race and try to come to this nice, even playing field. Unfortunately, they were incredibly abusive. They were only allowed to speak English. They were not allowed to talk about their cultures. They were not allowed to talk about their parents. Many of them never saw their parents ever again, and ultimately it left them with deep psychological issues to this day. It is incredibly harmful that the idea of any child being taken from their home, even in the idea that the Indian Child Welfare Act here that my colleagues have presented on the other side of the field. That is an issue. However, that's not the precedent the Indian Child Welfare Act always takes. This is a very specific case, and it's not representative of the ICWA. Beyond that, the government doesn't do enough to promote Native culture. Cheryl's right about this. However, in order to actually further this, keeping children as much as possible within their cultures does help promote them. It helps them learn things like the languages. It helps them learn things like the dances. It helps them learn the parts of them that are meaningful and have almost become lost in certain places of the United States. And it's incredibly important to maintain those even without government funding. Uday, do you have anything to say?
Yeah. Going more off of what Cheryl said about the museums. Museums are an interesting way to preserve a culture. It almost models them as something that existed in the past and doesn't anymore, almost like purporting this myth of a dying people, and allowing us to like focus on museums as like a primary way of preserving culture is more detrimental in the long run. Focusing on actual material implementations of economic reforms and other forms of aid given directly to these communities will allow the culture to persist and prosper in more beneficial ways. So we do agree that the government right now does not do nearly enough to help these cultures, and more aid needs to be given, and specifically in a way that allows for the autonomy of the cultures that exist today. We can't give aid on conditions. We can't give aid on like some idea of white saviorism. We do have to give aid in order to allow these cultures to have their own self-determining path to further their own prosperity. And this goes back to this false dichotomy between economics and culture, where we can focus on the economics of having a good home on Native American reservations while promoting this culture through these programs that focus more on the prosperity of the tribe as a whole rather than on individual children who are up for adoption. And this will have the best long-term impact on the prosperity of these communities.
I think you said it quite well. All right, ready for questions?
Before we get started on questions, I'll give you an example of the kind of question that I think they did actually get asked on this case, and then we'll open it up and let people play around a little bit so you can see what it's like to be a judge, you know. But I'm going to stand behind you to do this because he needs to see me and they need to hear you too. So that's a little weird, lurking behind. So these guys are good, they're pros. So here's the kind of question that I think they might get asked, especially by a sort of philosopher type. So it sounds as though, I'm speaking to the presenting team. It sounds as though when you think about prioritizing the culture, you're willing to make that the rule, even if there are exceptions where there isn't a lot of cultural gain in the particular kind of case, and maybe some economic detriment. So are you suggesting that because the rule works in most cases that we shouldn't think about the particulars of the case, or are you thinking that the Indian Child Welfare Act allows you to look at the particulars of the case but just weights the cultural issues more? So you see what I'm asking? So this is a question about should we focus on the particulars of an individual case, so like the one Lawrence raised, or should we try to figure out a rule and just apply the rule whatever happens in the individual case, or is there some third option?
I think that there is a third option. You really can look at it at a case-by-case basis, but you can set the precedent I guess I should talk to you guys.
Yeah.
You can set the precedent that culture should, in as many cases as possible, be maintained. There might be a case where a Native child can't find a Native adoptive family. Adoptive families are hard to come by, I understand that. However, in this case, you are still able to place them with someone else. But if you set the precedent that maintaining culture and that maintaining the idea the Native isn't broken, or that you're not just giving them to white families because you can, I think that that ultimately comes at a nice, even crossroads. There's an equal playing ground that you can find.
And in a sense of like culture being a general rule, obviously rules have exceptions, but the point that I tried to get across in my first speech was how pervasive this concept of culture is in all of our daily interactions. And that's why I think culture should be a very significant factor in informing our decisions in terms of this case.
All right, so I'll just be the person who calls on people, but we'll get hands. So let me start up here. You get to ask questions all the time, Colin. You don't count. Come on, let everybody else do this. So we'll let you go first. I'm sorry, Gayla.
So if we were to let the whites adopt, what would their responsibility be in raising a Native American child? Should they be willing to have that Native American child know about their background, or encourage them to be who they are?
I think that's a great question. I would personally love to have Steve, I think he wants you to come.
Oh, okay, wait, gosh, darn it. I got to move around the microphone.
I would love for white families to teach their Native babies about their Native culture. However, this goes back to the points that we were talking about earlier with the anti-vax tax. You unfortunately can't set a huge precedent on what a parent does, especially after they are formally adopted by a family. Again, if we perpetuate the culture, if we bring the culture back to life in America, I think that could ultimately help any child that is placed outside of its tribe. But again, I think it would be great if any white parent taught their adopted Native American child about their culture. I think that would help them transition. I think that would help them learn better about who they are. And growing up, that's always a great thing to know, more about yourself. So, do you have anything?
No.
No? Okay.
Okay, we'll try to make them go rapid fire.
We probably only have time for one more.
Okay, it's time for one. I had one question here, and we'll let you go. I'll have to stand next to you.
Okay, I love, first of all, the presenting team placed value on culture, because I think the American culture is that we primarily place value on economics. So from that standpoint, when we're in the position where adoption preference is granted to, for instance, a white family for economic reasons, is the solution to this problem not necessarily we choose between culture and economics, but more that we choose a way to balance the two? In other words, should the solution be that as part of the Indian Child Welfare Act, instead dictates a program for non-Native families who decide to adopt? Is it ethical to say, okay, if you're going to adopt a Native child, that you have this responsibility to carry on the culture? Is that balancing, is that more a solution, and what would that look like?
I think that's very similar to the question before. I would love for the Indian Child Welfare Act to implement a program like this. With this comes funding, with this comes the furtherment of the culture, and it comes with a better understanding of Native culture and Native children and Native needs. And I think that would ultimately overarch the economic argument if we could find a program like that. If you're giving them to a white family, I think it's a great option to teach them about their Native children.